maybe you walk away, maybe you get what you want, but the city of Fort Lauderdale is going to be left with phased pieces of the vision.
There's a gentleman in the room who I wish I never met. His name's Wayne Jessup. Sorry, Wayne. He made sure that that was not going to be an issue for you. He made sure going through this process, as we go from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3 to phase 4, that the city still gets what his vision is bargained for. And if all we were to do was to do the hotel in the front and say, no more, Wayne has made sure that part of that, I've already done the marine walk around it. So you're never going to be left with the whole of the donut framework. I think we've worked through the PUD phasing on that. The certain conditions that Sharon Miller have asked us to put into the PUD conditions of approval that say what the public has to have at each time. And again, you have to realize it's all about the money. We operate a hotel. We operate a marina. I want to get people to come to those facilities, and if it doesn't look like a world-class facility, you can't put lipstick on a pig. It has to work. So I think truly my interest or the city's interest in that regard, and your city attorney and your city planner, I think, have protected you from that.
Thanks.
Wayne, I love you.
Mr. Moskowitz.
I'd like to take a few moments, if I may, and express with everyone here my comments and feelings with regards to not only this particular application, but also my vision for the city of Fort Lauderdale. And let me start off by saying that I consider this a privilege to have such an open forum and to have the opportunity to work with my colleagues to state my opinions with regards to something that I hold in the highest of regard. I do appreciate the time, energy, and money that has been expended to bring the application before us to its current fruition. Many of you know me for the last several years. I see a lot of familiar faces, and you know how transparent I have been with regards to my feelings on high-rise residential development. Specifically, it is more geared towards the negative than the positive. And I've listened to everything spoken today, and nothing has modified my orientation. There is one fundamental problem with regards to this application, and that simply is the applicant does not have fee simple ownership to this property. And the way I feel, and it's purely philosophical, is that if we are the landowners of this property, we should not be putting residences, which are permanent in nature, on land that the city owns. No one is going to buy a unit in either of these two buildings for only 99 years. They're going to buy a unit indefinitely. That's the nature of an investment in property. Yet, even after the 99 years, the city will still be the owner of this land. And as a steward of the city of Fort Lauderdale, I cannot philosophically agree with putting residential property on city-owned land. And to me, this is going out on a limb. This would be a hoodwink. This is larceny. Imagine if I wanted to build a building on your land and used an industry as a scapegoat to convince you to allow me to do so. More or less, that's what's happening here tonight. And if the city never purchased that land, there wouldn't even be a marine industry. That's the first thing. It would just be condos. We wouldn't even be here today talking about the boat show. So philosophically, I simply disagree with putting residences on city-owned land. And that's just the way I feel. Furthermore, as far as personal interest is concerned, there is a historical component to this land. a quite extensive historical component. And a lot of people don't study the city's history, but I certainly do. And if you allow me 2 more minutes, I will tell you the historical significance of this land. In 1839, Major William Lauderdale marched down here with the Tennessee Volunteers and constructed 3 forts. William Lauderdale was only alive for the construction of the first fort. However, a survey in 1870 by Marcellus Williams has determined that in this general vicinity of the Bahia Mar property, the 3rd of the 3 original forts of Fort Lauderdale was constructed. Now, the Bahia Mar property actually juts out into the intracoastal, and that was land that was dredged. So really, when we're talking about the Bahia Mar land as far as a historical perspective, I'm solely referring to the easternmost portion of that jutted out property and perhaps A1A and perhaps beachfront. But nevertheless, one of the 3 original forts was situated in and around this property. Fast forward from 1839 to 1897, when the original Fort Lauderdale House of Refuge, constructed in 1876, was moved to the Bahia Mar site because it was in need of repair. And they moved it to this particular site because there was prior construction on this site, hence the 1st and the 3rd of the original forts. And so here we have one of the 3 original forts. We have the House of Refuge on this land. And because of the prior activity on this land, that's why this specific land was a Coast Guard base owned by the federal government in the 1920s. And the federal government owned this land until the 1940s, when they decided they didn't need a Coast Guard base in Fort Lauderdale. They moved it to Miami. And it was due to 2 pioneering citizens the reason why Fort Lauderdale actually owns this land. A man by the name of George W. English had a law student acquaintance of his who was a U.S. senator who convinced the federal government to lower the price of the land from $1 million to $600,000. And then it was up to a man by Robert Gore, who owned the Fort Lauderdale Sentinel, who owned the Governor's Club Hotel, to put in $350,000 out of the $600,000 and have the citizenry include the additional $250,000 to actually purchase this property. The city then issued a bond for $2 million and used the remaining proceeds of that bond, after they paid back the citizenry, to build Bahia Mar. In 1947, it opened. A lot of us don't seem to take in mind the historical significance of the decisions of our time, but I certainly do. And when I think about this particular land, I think about, what has been situated on there previously. And there's evidence of the 3rd of the original forts of Fort Lauderdale, the House of Refuge, and the pioneering spirit of our predecessors. And I seriously doubt they would be in favor of putting residences on land that they fought so hard to own. And if you want to blame someone in all of this, blame the commissioners of the 1950s who would execute a 99-year lease. I mean, we're in discussions with FP&L over a 30-year franchise agreement, which we deem too long. What were they thinking? I don't know. But I do know that if we put residences on city-owned land, which are going to be permanent in nature, we may come to regret it upon lease expiration or at some point in the future. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Ms. Moss?
I have a couple of questions to the applicant. Is financing in place?
All right. I can't get financing if I don't have a project to know what I'm going to go get financing for.
Okay.